Hello and welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Gordon Smith, and I'm joined this week by Jay Shabbat. In part one, we're sharing C-suite insights from Hong Kong's Cathay Pacific, and in part two, we're discussing the Boeing 777X. Hey, Jay, how's it going?
Hi, Gordon. How are you?
Doing very, very well. Coming to you from Hong Kong, where we had Typhoon Regassa, really very, very nasty storm. I think most meteorologists, of which I am not one, described it as the strongest storm to hit anywhere on the planet so far in 2025. Hopefully, it will be the strongest and nowhere else we'll see something even bigger. But yeah, it was a very nasty storm, and I'm in town for the Roots World Conference, which I assume a lot of people, but not everyone listening to the podcast, has some familiarity with. It's essentially a speed dating event between airports and airlines. So, our good old friend J Airways might want to be considering some service to Gordon International Airport, and we'll meet together and we'll discuss maybe some marketing opportunities, those all important charges and everything else. And hopefully, at the end of the day, we'll be able to agree a shiny new route for you to fly 10 times a day. How's that sound, Jay?
J Airways is very much interested.
Yeah, that's the core principle. But unfortunately, with the typhoon, it was terrible timing for the event. In Hong Kong, I was able to catch up with Ronald Lam, who is the CEO of Cathay Group. He was due to be speaking yesterday as we're recording here at the event, but obviously with everything else going on with the typhoon, that wasn't possible. But he was able to move around his schedule and join the event this morning as we're speaking here. And yeah, we got some new insights on Cathay's strategy and where they're going, Jay. Do you want to hear them?
For sure. Yeah, tell us.
Yeah, so it was Ronald Lam, but also he was joined by Lavinia Lau, who's the Chief Customer and Commercial Officer at Cathay Group. And I say Cathay Group, not Cathay Pacific, because the Cathay Group does span more than just Cathay Pacific, the full service flag carrier of Hong Kong. You've now got four divisions, as they describe them: Cathay Pacific, Hong Kong Express, HK Express, Cathay Cargo, and Cathay Lifestyle. We'll focus obviously on the passenger airlines here today, HK Express and Cathay. And yeah, things are going pretty well. Ronald said they had the three worst years of Cathay's history during the COVID years. And he was quite open about the fact that Hong Kong's very strict policies regarding quarantine and everything else, which seems like ancient history now, but was a very big issue up until, well, as recently as 22, 23, depending on your metric, really did hammer the airline. But he said the 3 years that have occurred since the worst of the COVID lockdown and everything else have been Cathay's strongest. So yeah, it's not completely plain sailing. There was plenty of discussion around tariffs, not least for the cargo division and everything else, passenger flows coming through mainland China, etc., aircraft delays. There's plenty to keep them busy, but he said that the airline and the group more broadly is in better shape now than it was pre COVID. And in terms of the return on revenue invested, it's in a much healthier place as well. We also heard from Fred Lam
And
at
and the
Roots
numbers,
this
sorry to
morning.
interrupt you there,
No, go
Gordon.
ahead,
I
though.
didn't mean to
Go ahead.
interject. The numbers do bear that out. It's not just talk. Cathay Pacific did have an excellent 2023. Their operating margin was 14%. They had an excellent 2024. Their operating margin was 13%. And looks like they're on their way to having a really good 2025 as well. For the first 6 months of this year, their operating margin was 11%. Not just idle talk there, Gordon. He's not blowing smoke.
There's been plenty blowing around Hong Kong over the past 48 hours, Joe,
Yeah,
but
to
you
get
know that
that
it's not
analogy.
it's not bluster there. But if we look at Hong Kong Express, that's a little bit of a problem child. Regular listeners and regular readers of Airline Weekly will know that wasn't a brand that was a cafe to begin with. That was acquired relatively recently, and yeah, it's still not quite where they want it to be. I'm sure the numbers, Jay, if you've got them there with regard to operating margin, are not going to be quite as pretty as Cathay Mainline, but there is still a lot of expansion going into HK Express, and they said the opportunities for that brand are still quite significant. And looking at Fred Lam, he's the chairman of the Hong Kong Airport Authority. Around 60 million passengers pass through Hong Kong International Airport each year. Fred Lam and his team want to get up to 120 million in the next 10 years. And bearing in mind it's a relatively mature market, I use the word relatively quite loosely, that's a huge number. And you could So there wasn't quite an audible gasp in the room when that figure was shared, but I think there were a few raised eyebrows, both privately and literally, thinking that's a very significant target. They do have the new third runway, which came online in November of last year here in Hong Kong, and that is helping things a lot. The airport was badly slot constrained, certainly before COVID. The third runway is really opening things up there, but yeah, Cathay won't be able to do that alone, a doubling of numbers in 10 years. So inevitably, they'll be looking at other operators to bridge that gap. And they were quite open about that. Fred Lam and other executives saying it's fantastic to have a partner like Cathay at the airport as a sort of anchor client, if you like. But they are looking at opportunities for other Fifth Freedom routes. We've seen United Airlines recently announced that they'll be flying more stuff through Hong Kong on their way down to deeper parts of Asia. That's the impression I got. Is that they don't want to take Cathay for granted, but equally they don't want to bank purely on Cathay and to a lesser extent HK Express. They're certainly keeping their eyes open. And that's before you consider the broader commercial realities, Jay. There've been obviously a lot of changes to the political landscape in Hong Kong and the economic landscape in Hong Kong over the past decade. It's not the destination for some people that it once was for various reasons. And I think they're mindful of the fact that there's no complacency. Certainly when you've got very, very competitive mega hubs like Changi. The broader impression I got as well is that they're not just banking on Hong Kong. They're looking at the broader Greater Bay Area, a population of around 80 million, huge cities like Guangdao. How do you pronounce that, Jay? Guangzhou?
Guangzhou.
Guangzhou. I'll say that again.
Yeah, Guangdong is the province and Guangzhou is the city.
There we go.
Yeah, Zhou like the name Joe, Joe.
And cities like Guangzhou, Jay, obviously home to China's Southern, they channel a huge amount of traffic through there, but they are looking to make things as seamless as possible for passengers in that Greater Bay Area to tap into to those that live or want to reach the mainland to come through Hong Kong as their airport of choice. Another little tidbit, which I'll share with our listeners. Do you remember back in sort of late June, there were rumors that it was really actually, if you go right back to the end of 2024, a rumor began that a great earthquake would occur in Japan sometime in July 2025. And this was based on a prophecy in the 1999 manga, The Future I Saw by Ryu Asuki. And it spread across several Asian countries and resulted in a notable decline in holiday travel, in particular to Japan during July 2025. Our Asia editor, Peyton Bhutia at Skift, covered the story for us. But I hadn't heard anything beyond anecdotal reports of this. But Lavinia Lau was able to quantify it for us. She said between Hong Kong and Japan in July 2025, bookings were down 40%. And a lot of that was attributed to the superstition, to the fear that this prophecy may come true. Real business impact there.
Yeah, wow. And the only reason why those numbers don't surprise me is because AirAsia, for one, has talked about those same that same incident that you mentioned, that same phenomenon, and they also gave numbers that made me open my eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were various discussions about the power of social media and influencing people. Obviously, this is a very extreme, arguably quite a unique example, but it did strike me that management at a Cathay, and I'm sure this is replicated across carriers around the world, are quite mindful of the fact that these kind of black swan, quite kooky scenarios can appear, but can have a very, very nasty business impact. But Lavinia did say that people were still traveling. They weren't just necessarily traveling between Hong Kong and Japan. So discretionary travel that was heading down to Malaysia, for example, or to Thailand or to Vietnam or somewhere else. So people were still getting their fix, but not necessarily in Tokyo, Osaka, or Nagoya. But she also emphasized that as soon as July passed, things picked right back up again as if nothing had ever happened. And of course, there wasn't a great earthquake. There was something in the Russian Far East which impacted that region, but it wasn't nearly anything on the scale of the prophecy.
False prophet.
Indeed. False prophets and falling prophets, I'm sure, on the Hong Kong Japan route.
False prophets cause falling profits. That's the headline there.
There's your headline, Jay. I also got to ask Ronald Lam a question directly at a sort of fringe press conference held at the Roots World event, and that was with regard to regional aircraft, because I spoke to Tony Fernandez at the Skiff Global Forum last week, and he was discussing various things, and one among those was the regional aircraft order. He says he's still in active discussions with both Airbus and Embraer. He even said he's driving both of them nuts. He said it's the longest RFP campaign that he's had in his time in the industry, and that goes way back to him procuring AirAsia in 2001, I think it was, for 1 Malaysian ringgit. That's roughly 26 US cents at the time, albeit with all the debt and nasty bits in there as well. But that's obviously paid off very handsomely. But he said, yeah, done the numbers, and at the risk of muddying the waters with extra fleet complexity, obviously AirAsia is an A320 operator with the XLRs to come, AirAsia X, a separate operation, at least for now. He said, you know what? Yes, there's going to be some complexity here, but it's going to be worth it because you're just going to get so much feeder traffic, and that will be a suitable payoff. That is a model that you've seen elsewhere, also notably at Scoot Airline. Singapore Airlines is a low-cost subsidiary. They have the Embraer E2, a relatively modest subfleet, but nonetheless notable. I asked Ronald Lam if he was going to do anything either HK Express or with Cathay, particularly with the new third runway and with the emphasis on very close catchment area feeder traffic, whether a regional fleet would be of interest. And he said essentially no. He said the smallest aircraft that we've got within the group right now is the A320neo. And he said, quote, that's probably the smallest size we will ever go. And he cited economies of scale. And he said, if we're going to be flying somewhere, we want to be doing it properly and meaningfully and getting the most out of the aircraft. No regional jets on the way for Cathay. So I'm sure there'll be a few Embraer executives who are a little disappointed at that. But they've had a great couple of weeks, Jay. LATAM ordering a load of E2s and also a Velo in the US, being the US launch customer there for the E2 with 50 firm orders plus another 50. Yeah, I'm sure there's still a few champagne corks popping in Brazil.
I think so, yeah, and we'll see if they win that Mr. Fernandez order from AirAsia. That would be another big win.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any other little tidbits? I thought there was some discussion around North American markets. Cathay announced just a couple of days ago that they're going back into Seattle. They said the Dallas route is doing really, really well. That's going to go up to daily. They also said that Lavinia Lau said she was pleasantly surprised with the Riyadh route. She implied that this was more of a long-term strategic bet, but that is going to go up to daily from, I think it was a 4 or 5 times weekly start. So clearly some momentum already in Riyadh, and that's obviously a market that's a lot of airlines from around the world are looking at for various reasons. And the broader priorities in terms of growth, certainly at Cathay Mainline, is not just unserved markets, but underserved markets. So they're really going to be doubling down on intensifying frequencies, particularly with this new third runway. It's allowing additional frequencies and to optimize those banks of traffic. So previously, they might have had the traffic rights or the slots for the destination airport, but they wouldn't have been able to get something out of Hong Kong. To align that is now becoming a good bit easier. So that combined with various fleet bits and pieces, not least the new A330neos for the regional wide body, but also the 777-9. And there's plenty going on at Cathay, J.
Yeah, sure is. And the only other thing I would add, and I don't know if it came up in your discussions with Ronald or in general at the conference, but Cathay does have a pretty tight relationship with Air China over on the mainland. They have cross ownership, substantial cross ownership, and there's always been talk about perhaps them getting even closer over time. But that's a relationship that's I'm sure very important to them both financially and strategically.
Yeah, absolutely. The concept of Hong Kong being very much part of China was evident throughout both Ronald and Lavinia's comments. And Hong Kong has various sort of unique selling points that the mainland doesn't, not least its own traffic rights and a fantastic airport here. Geographically, it's also got some real benefits. But the mainland and operating as a gateway to China, be that Hong Kong or the mainland, was very, very clear throughout the discussions there. No specific mention in any of today's discussions around China per se, but the importance of the mainland China market was evident, Jay.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess the only other market I'll bring up is the US market, or we can call it North America if you'd like. There have been so few non-stops between mainland China and North America over the past couple of years because of various things happening politically, whether it's Russian overflights or US China diplomatic tensions, et cetera, et cetera. The fact that there are so few mean that a lot of people who need to travel between North America and the mainland are going through Hong Kong. They're going through other hubs as well, but Hong Kong has definitely picked up a lot of that business. And as we know from so many of our past discussions and what we've written about at length in Airline Weekly, the premium section of that market has been doing very well, just that long haul segment. A lot of people flying in premium seats. So I have to believe that Cathay is picking up and has been picking up quite a lot of that over the past couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are making up for a bit of lost time with the Aria Suite, which is their new business class product, which was launched at tail end of last year, October, November last year. That's on select routes. They're looking for a bit of reliability. So I think Heathrow, I think it's going into Vancouver and a few others. It's an impressive product. I haven't flown it on myself, but I have seen it in the flesh. And you could argue, a cynic would say, a critic would say, this is a product that Cathay should have had 5, 6, 7 years ago. They're simply playing catch up. It's going to take ages for them to fit them all out. And by the time they do, they'll need to be looking at it again. But that's just the nature of the beast. And I think COVID obviously had a huge impact on that as well. If you are keeping to
Right.
the hyper premium side of things, Jay, I know some of our listeners like to fantasize one day about flying first class. They are working on a new first class product. I think it's being called the Halo Suite. So we got the Aria and the Halo. That is still mooted for that's going to be dovetailed with the launch of the 777-9, which is now 2027 for Cathay. I'm sure there's some frustration there, but I think
I said Ronald Lamb wasn't lying when he said Cathay Pacific was performing. I wasn't lying just now when I said premium demand was performing very well on long haul routes, intercontinental routes. The fact that Cathay and so many other long haul airlines around the world are investing so much money in these really expensive new first class, business class suites is kind of testament to that. The market is so good that they're willing to spend that money.
absolutely. Will it last, Jay? That's a big question.
Will it last?
Will it last? Let's find out. Get your crystal ball out. Anything to add on Cathay or Hong Kong before we head into the break?
No, other than I think they did order some new 777s recently, which is a good segue, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, they had a top-up order for 14 aircraft, which, if there's any aviation historians out there, that was the first commitment for new Boeing airplanes in more than a decade. But what it did do, the August top-up order that is leapfrog Singapore Airlines, making Cathay Pacific Asia Pacific's biggest buyer of the 777-9 so far. Not the world's biggest. That's, I think, Qatar Airways, particularly after the President Trump visit to the Middle East. I think they topped up their own numbers there, Jay. But yes, we will be discussing the 777-9 in part 2. But before that, a quick reminder to send any questions or comments that you might have for us to podcasts@skift.com. That's podcasts with an S at the end. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. And if you are enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review so we can continue to spread the word about the Airline Weekly Lounge. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in part 2. Hello and welcome back to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm Gordon Smith, joined as usual by co-host Jay Shabbat. Part 1, we were discussing Cathay Pacific and Hong Kong more broadly. Coming to you from Hong Kong this week. Jay, we are discussing in part 2 the 777X in particular. Tell our listeners why that's relevant right now.
Sure. As we mentioned before, we got a nice order from Cathay, top-up order from Cathay Pacific over in Hong Kong. The reason why I think what you're alluding to, Gordon, is Airline Weekly's feature story this week, and we are speaking on September 25th, but by the time you'll be listening to this, the new feature story will be out, and it is on the wide-body aircraft market. So we won't, in this conversation, talk about all of the different wide-body models out there, but for the sake of one example, we will have a little discussion on the 777X, which is Boeing's new version of their largest plane, the 777. So the 777 came out, I guess it was mid 90s, I want to say.
Yeah, something like
And
that.
yeah, something like that. It came out in different versions. The Dash 300 ER is the one that you'll see all over the industry right now. And airlines love it. Lessors love it. It's a great airplane, great engines from GE, and it's a very popular aircraft. So the question is there a need to replace that with a larger version of that same aircraft? So Boeing introduced this new plane called the 777X. They call it 777X. There's two versions of it. One is the 8, which is a little smaller version, and one is the 9, the more popular version. This plane is not flying yet, and it's not even certified yet to fly. It's been delayed by years to the frustration of all of its customers, a few in particular that are rather vocal about their frustrations.
I'm looking at you,
So
so Tim Clark.
Yeah, Mr. Tim Clark and Mr. Spohr over in Germany and several others. So yeah, they have just been delayed by a very long period. Boeing now says hopefully next year, but we've heard that before. So we'll see if next year really is next year, if that really does mean 2026. But maybe pretty soon we'll start seeing that in the air. Now, the question is, and we go into this in much deeper detail in the feature story for anyone who wants to take a closer look. But just I'll briefly ask the question now: is this 777X, is it going to be a big success for Boeing? And the evidence so far, honestly, they might dispute this, but the evidence so far, in my mind, is that no, it's been a disappointing airplane, and not just because of the delays. If you look at the current order book, and I'm looking here at Cirium Fleets data, Fleets Analyzer, there are currently 564 planes, 777Xs on firm order. Some of those are eights, most of those are nines. Those are firm orders. That doesn't include some of the Qatar Airways commitments that you referenced in the first part of our podcast, Gordon. There are a couple other options and letters of intent, and whatnot. So don't take this number as the final word or the gospel, but 564 very firm orders. Now, that's not a terrible number, but do want to point out that something like, I believe it's 60%, close to 60%, about 50% of all of those orders are with just two airlines. One is Emirates and one is Qatar Airways, two Gulf carriers. So some of those Qatar Airways from previous orders are firm. And if you remove those, the total order book starts to look a little bit thin. Then you start to get into a couple other big carriers, Cathay Pacific, Singapore Airlines, Etihad, British Airways. There's a lot of concentration risk. There's about 5 or 6 airlines that make about 80% of the order book. Now, there are, in addition, some conspicuous, let's say, non-believers, some orders or airlines that you think would be natural candidates for an airplane like this that have refrained so far, which is not to say that they won't eventually buy it. Perhaps when it starts flying, perhaps when it does start flying, airlines will get a better sense of what the economics really are. So I'm not saying that these orders will never happen, but if you look at some big 777-300 customers like Air France KLM, like United, like Turkish Airlines, like Saudia, none of these carriers have ordered any yet. So that has to be a little bit of a concern for Boeing. I know I think they've publicly said that they're actively trying to sell it to Air Canada. It's another major 777-300ER customer. They're, I believe, in an active campaign to sell them to LATAM, another 300ER customer. So I don't think the jury is totally out. But personally, if I may, I do want to express some skepticism, if only because, without going into too much detail, you could read the article for the feature story for more. But it does seem like a plane, like a very big plane with economics that are, sure, the seat economics are going to be better than the smaller planes like the 787 or the A350, but will the all-in cost be that much better to justify such a big aircraft? Now, obviously, if you're flying from London Heathrow, you want just give me the biggest you've got. So I'll even take A380s. Not now, but when the A380s first came out, but let's even do those. Or even Cathay Pacific, as you mentioned, Gordon, the situation in Hong Kong is improving with the third runway, but that is still congested airspace, congested airport.
For sure.
Even Dubai, people don't overlook that. That's a very congested airport now as well. So you can see why the 777X makes total sense for a British Airways, for an Emirates, for Cathay. Will it make sense for an Air Canada, for United? United's kind of a big one to watch. Delta, they went with the A350. Qantas went with the A350. There's some other examples like that. So
Japan Airlines.
Japan Airlines, another great example. Tokyo is an airport. And I don't believe here, I'm looking at the list. Oh, I apologize. Yeah, All Nippon, which is, the big rival to Japan Airlines, also in Tokyo. They have ordered, looks like 18 on firm order. Yeah, it's Tokyo. Totally makes sense. Very slot constrained situation there. But keep an eye on airlines like Air Canada, like United, and also not just whether they buy them, but how many. Will it be just a handful? Will they be purchased in substantial numbers? So, what do you think after all that talk, Gordon? Are you a believer or a non-believer in the 777X?
It needs to work. The program needs to work for the industry and from a Boeing perspective. I would wonder, Jay, if we don't have Boeing here to defend themselves, if they would simply say the reason orders are a little lackluster, particularly if you look beyond the two mega orders from the Middle East, whether this is simply where the various programs are at and where they're succeeding. So there arguably are parallels with the A330neo, which if you speak to Airbus and say, why is this not selling better than you thought it would? And they say, well, actually, a lot of the current A330 classics are still flying very well, and you'd expect those to be coming up for retirement, at least among the sort of trophy flag carrying operators in the next 5, 10, maybe even 15 years. And that means the airlines aren't immediately needing to buy the 330 Neo. And you could argue a similar point with the 777, perhaps to a lesser extent, that actually a lot of the 777s out there are still flying pretty well, and they've maybe got a solid decade plus on them yet. So there isn't necessarily a reason for airlines, unless they're really desperate or they really want to get ahead of the pack, to invest in the 777X, particularly when it is such a program that's been dogged by so much uncertainty and delay. And I'm not a mechanic, I'm not an engineer, but you do wonder how much those folding wingtips have got to do with it. They look great, and they're certainly helping with the marketing and the PR cut through of why is this plane important, why is it significant. The folding wingtips are notable. I think even the most casual of listeners would appreciate that. But you do have to ask yourself, Jay, is this the right plane that Boeing is banking on in terms of its wide body future? And I think there will be people saying this is a plane that is going to do okay, but Boeing probably needs something even stronger to really fight off the A350 and various other threats that are out there. I think it will do okay, but I think it's probably going to be a marriage of convenience for more airlines. And I do think we're going to see others more broadly hemorrhaging their wide body, very large XWB fleets to Airbus, which
Yeah,
I'm happy to be proved wrong. But I think I speak to airline executives every other day, and that's the sort of direction of travel that I feel that a number of existing 777 carriers are moving in.
all great points, Gordon. And just to be perfectly clear, Boeing is extremely well positioned in the wide body space overall with their Dreamliners. The 787 is a fantastic aircraft. It's universally beloved. Both the Dash 9, the Dash 10 are the two most popular ones. The Dash 9 is just it's the killer app. It's I don't know what the superlative is, but it's the golden child of the wide body fleet, and the A350 as well. Now, this is specifically talking about Boeing. This is not to disparage anything on the Airbus side, but in Boeing's case, the 787-9 is just fantastic, fantastic aircraft, and it's going to be a fantastic aircraft for so many years to come. There's by no means this is not a situation with the 737 line where it's okay, they're starting to get a lot of pressure. When are we going to have to replace this thing already? 787's got long life to it, and they can do more to it too. I mean, there's not going to be another stretch, but you can make the 10, you could extend the range on the Dash 10, which I think they're doing, or I've read that somewhere that they're either doing it or thinking about doing it. Someone can clarify if they have the information on that. But it's yeah, they're very well positioned. It's just the for the sake of this conversation, it's just a question of whether all those 300 ERs that you mentioned out there that you referred to, Gordon, will ultimately those operators elect to replace those with either the X or just sacrifice some size in favor of just taking more some of the larger Dreamliners, or even for that matter, going with the A350, which is a larger plane, 900, 1000, whatever it may be. And my contention, my thesis from before was just that a lot of these airlines might do the latter. They might opt for the 787 A350 option rather than going all in for the X, which is going to be, by the way, you would have to believe, by the time it's ready to enter service, when people are actually paying for the thing, it's going to be, you have to believe, a rather expensive aircraft. And one, as you mentioned, with the folded wings that are going to entail some additional cost due to the operating complexity and some of the changes you're going to have to make operationally to reports, et cetera. Oh, and I should also add the very, very, very expensive fancy business class suites that you're going to have to put in these very large aircrafts. All this being just some arguments about why perhaps the 777X might be less of a winner than Boeing might hope.
Time to dust off that corporate credit card, Jay. Some big spending on the way. As Jay says, we'll have much more detail in the next couple of issues about the narrow body and also the wide body market. If you're not already a subscriber to Airline Weekly, go to airlineweekly.com/subscribe. There you can get a free trial issue, find out what all the fuss is about. But yeah, many of the talking points that we've been covering in part 2 here, we'll go into much more detail in the issues. Please do take a look at that. And a reminder as well that as an Airline Weekly subscriber, you get full access to all the airline news on skift.com, plus Skift Research's airline reports, and perhaps best of all, in my very biased opinion, you get to join us in person for the Skift Aviation Forum. That's December 3rd in Fort Worth, Texas. Go to live.skift.com for all the details and the latest speakers there, Jay. But yeah, a free in-person ticket. Complimentary, I think, is what the marketing people like us to call it. A not free, complimentary ticket. To join us in person there, we look forward to seeing you. And yeah, it's shaping up to be a really exciting event.
It won't be in time for anybody to be flying a 777X to the event, but maybe next year, possibly.
Wow, next year, that would be okay. I will, $10, $10 on whether the 777X is able to fly anyone to Fort Worth for the 2026 event. That's a big ask, I think.
I'm going to take the negative side of that bet.
That's really smart. I didn't say which side of the wager I was going to get down on.
Yeah, I think you're going to owe me $10, but maybe Boeing will prove us wrong and make you $10 richer. We'll see.
There we go. Okay, we hit it here first and last. 777Xs to Dallas in 2026. Great. Okay, Jay, thanks for that. And yes, I will be back to regular programming next week, coming from Lisbon. And we've got the World Aviation Festival as well. And I've got some exciting interviews lined up for that's taking place in early October. So look forward to sharing all those insights with our listeners and in the Airline Weekly issue as well. But in the meantime, that's enough from me. Thanks to Jay for joining me, and thanks as always to our producers, Monica and Will, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now.
Whether you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please make sure to subscribe, rate us 5 stars, or leave us a positive review. This really helps us get the word out about the Airline Weekly Lounge, so we can continue to bring you this podcast every week, absolutely free of charge. And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Skift channel and hit the notification bell to find out whenever a new video drops.